With Ballin. Hello, I'm Kevin.
And I'm Brian.
And in this episode, we're going to talk about electronics and the end of physical media. So, in a previous episode, we talked about movies and how people are consuming entertainment. And in this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the devices that we use to consume that entertainment. And in particular, the death of the disc. So, I mean, when we grew up...
It sounds dirty.
Yeah.
It actually does.
But when we grew up, the CD was this magical thing, which I don't know why I didn't think the cassette tape was magical, because the record player, you can see the grooves on a record.
Right.
I can imagine why that record is producing sound. But even a cassette tape, I look at that tape and I can't see anything on it. And a CD, you can't see those pits that represent the ones and zeros. So I guess before we talk about the demise of it, let's talk about our introduction to it. So do you have any early experiences with the CD? Like, how did you first see it, hear about it?
So, in high school, in junior high, so this would be mid-'80s to 1992, I loved making mixtapes. You'll hear that term a lot from people that are probably 35 and older. So what I would do is I would turn on the radio, gather around, turn on the radio, and when a song came on I liked, I'd hit play and record, and I would record that song, and then I would hit stop, and I would be able to get any song I wanted, which was kind of the introduction to piracy, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So we learned how to steal music back when we were able to do that.
Yeah.
So soon after, I learned that there was this frisbee-looking thing that was much stronger because cassette tapes would break. They were flimsy plastic. And the tape itself, when people say the term, I need to tape this, what people don't realize is there was a strip of long tape in there that had the actual audio on it.
Yeah.
They would get caught in the rollers all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
I had cassette decks eat my tapes.
The term "eat the tape," exactly. Yep. That's where that came from.
And when you made the tape yourself, that was worse than if you bought it from the store. You could always buy it from the store again, but if you made it yourself, because the recording was in real time, it took 1 minute to get 1 minute of music recorded on it, and it's not like on stealing MP3s where you get 1,000 of them.
No. We were borrowing MP3s. Remember, we put them back when we were done.
Yeah, but I mean, my goodness, I remember eating a couple of tapes and being like, I spent weeks creating those.
It was far worse, because if you were getting chummy with a partner, or you were trying to get this girl to notice you, or whatever the case was, and you knew she liked a certain song, and you heard that song, you just happened to have the radio on, you heard that song and you recorded it. You're right, if that tape was destroyed by wrapping around the wheels of eating the tape, so to speak, you would have to wait till you stumbled across that song on the radio again, and the timing was perfect. So it was by far more devastating to lose a homemade mixtape as opposed to a CD. So CDs, I remember when I got to college, I became aware of what BMG and Columbia House was. They were essentially the precursor to Netflix, but it was movies. Only you would be buying the disc rather than renting the disc. Mm-hmm. Later, when the internet formed, you were able to essentially rent the song, if you will. But Yeah, I learned about it in college, and I remember the first CD I bought. It was Collective Soul, and it was 1995.
Wow.
So
Well,
I bought Collective Soul, Soul Asylum, and Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill.
uh-huh. Wow. I learned about it through my brother. He was in college while I was in high school, and he worked with a friend of his at a electronics store. And so he was buying this equipment at cost, and I got to see all of these, they weren't high end by any means, but I mean, there was no such thing as a cheap CD player. Back then, it was $150 for a cheap one, and that was the equivalent of, I want to say, $300-400 today. And just looking at that mirror surface on the back of the disc, and there were misconceptions. My brother told me that you could not damage it. It was you couldn't scratch it. If you did scratch it, it would still play. You just couldn't damage these things. Well, he had 2 copies of this one disc, and I took a key and I scratched the heck out of the one copy. It couldn't play at all.
Did you do that to test it, or
To
did you do
just
that
to
out of
test it.
spite?
No, to test it. But it failed miserably, that test. So that's how I was first introduced to it. And then while we were in high school, what became very popular was 6-disc changers.
Yes.
Buying aftermarket changers, putting them in the trunk, and being able to carry 6 discs worth of music. That's like 6 hours, 6 or 7 hours.
Yep.
Most commercial discs, though, were less than 60 minutes. But a CD was capable of 65, 70 minutes of music back then. But
aside from the scratching, though, it was a much stronger, much more resilient device. Like, if you dropped your cassette, it could break into 3 or 4 pieces.
Absolutely.
If you dropped your CD and you dropped it media side up, nothing happened.
Yep. Now, it is interesting to look at the construction of a cassette, just like looking at a VHS tape. It's not just that you've got, 100 yards of magnetic tape inside there, which is kind of fragile. It might not be that easy to accidentally break it, but you can stretch it, you can fold it.
I successfully spliced it once. So I thought I was really doing something good. When that happened and I got a kink in it, I cut it and I successfully taped the 2 pieces together. I had a small skip in the song, which I didn't think of. But I thought that was pretty impressive. But that was difficult to do.
Yeah. But the manufacturing process of producing a cassette versus a disc, where it's just stamping it out. The cassette has many pieces. In fact, there's a piece of metal with a piece of felt on it that is what the magnetic head, when it comes in from the tape deck, that's what it pushes against, and that the tape is drawn through. I mean, it's just so complex compared to this one-piece disc.
But think about it. So much more impressive than a record. The cassette was. The CD was so much more impressive than the cassette.
Yeah.
So, for sure. That is my introduction to it. It was college. And I got suckered into the BMG Columbia House thing, just about 75% of all the other college students. But CDs had a nice run. Unfortunately, I'm using past tense. CDs had a nice run.
Yeah.
I have a 2017 car. My wife has a 2016 car. Neither one of them have a CD player in them. Yeah. That's absurd.
Yeah. It's tragic. Mainly for me, because when they started putting MP3 capability, to be able to read MP3s off of CDs, it was perfect because you get 10 hours of music on a CD. You make it yourself. It's got exactly what you want on it. And
Yeah, that MP3 file was much smaller than a traditional CD file, correct?
it's about 10 times smaller.
Yep.
10 times more compact. At 128 kilobits per second, there is absolutely a noticeable deterioration in quality. But who cares? In the typical car, certainly any car that's got the factory speakers in it, you're never going to notice. At highway speeds, you've got enough other ambient noises around that the convenience factor, who would want to have 10 CDs in their car and shuffling through them where you could pop one disc in and that'll get you through a week's worth of commuting.
Pretty much.
Just exclusively listening to that. So, yeah, it's kind of sad that the CD it's become an afterthought in the automobile, because that's one of the places where it is most valuable, because that's when you don't have Wi-Fi typically in your car. So if you want to listen to music in your car, unless you, well, you know what? You can use a thumb drive. I don't know of any cars that don't have a USB in lieu of a CD player.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up. I don't have a CD player, but I have 2 USBs, and I have an actual SD card. In fact, you produced me music for one of my drives home once.
Yep.
That is what boggles my mind. Is I now have an SD card slot in my car that can take the traditional sized SD card or the micro SD. Mm-hmm. But they all come with adapters now, so you buy one, you get them both.
Yeah.
I find that to be fascinating, that I could have 256 gigabytes of data in the size of essentially my thumbnail.
Yep.
But it's not as convenient. It's not as personal. But somebody would say to me, but Brian, it's far more convenient because you can look on the display on your radio and pick any song you want. I don't think that's more convenient. I really don't. First of all, there's potentially thousands of songs on there instead of 15. So I don't think that's any more convenient at all. I think it's far less convenient. But at least my 2017 has some form of audio capability, because you're right. When you're in a car, you can't watch because you're busy watching something else. So you have to listen. That is the most opportune time, which is why I'm terribly upset of the demise of the radio industry, because radio's perfect for the car.
Yeah.
And we still spend time in the car. So how do we reconnect the car with the radio? That's a different topic, but it is not convenient at all, and it is sad to a point. But it hasn't just affected the audio industry. It has certainly affected the video industry as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to say a couple more things on the car, because I spend a tremendous amount of time in the car.
You have a fairly good commute, and then you have that drive at launch time. I mean, you have that drive quite a ways.
And I am very particular in how I consume I love podcasts, I love music, and I also love audiobooks. So you mentioned, being able to see all the files on the screen. I had the idea at one time, all right, I've got a USB thumb drive. I can have a folder for music, a folder for podcasts, and a folder for books. And I will literally not have to take that thing out of the car I could literally go a year with these. I've got 32 gig, 64 gig, 128 gig thumb drives. I wouldn't have to take it out for a year. But what happens when you spend a couple of weeks on podcasts, but you just want to listen to music one day coming home?
Yes.
You're going to leave that folder. You're not going to know where you're at. So I would love for it to be a little more. I'd love to be able to program it so that I can click on like genre or something, have some kind of a preset that, okay, I want to listen to music, pick up in the music area where I left off. All right, now I want to watch a podcast, listen to a podcast. I haven't quite figured out how to do that type of, you know, set it up yet. But you mentioned having an SD card and a USB, and that's pretty much how I've juggled between them. Is 2 out of the 3 I can do effectively by doing that. Separate them out. One of them's your music. One of them's your podcast.
Because it remembers where you leave off.
Because it remembers
on
where you
one
leave
of the
off.
media, it remembers where you leave off.
Yep. And then, audiobooks are the one thing that I can't accommodate with that. But I did want to say, when I was in college, that's when I got my first CD player. Well, nope, I had a rack system that I put together when I was in 11th grade. And that included a dual cassette deck and a CD player. And then when I went to college, I got a portable CD player. I got a computer with a disk drive in it. And I also got a 6-disc changer for my car. So I had a rack system, portable, in the car, in my computer, and I literally didn't have 4 CDs. I have 4 players. I didn't have 4 CDs, but I love the technology.
You had you had all of the devices, but you didn't have the delivery.
Yes. And this is what I've found out about myself, is that I don't want to say I love gadgets. I love technology, and I love seeing how they work and everything. But I was relying on my brother for my CDs. I would borrow his, so I was using them, but I didn't have my own. That's not where my I spent my budget on the technology, not on the content.
Well, my mother-in-law, who is mid-60s, when she first got into my wife's car, 2016, she comes, we picked her up to go somewhere, and she had, I can't remember the disc. I feel like it was the Beatles, possibly Earth, Wind, and Fire, because she likes to tease me about Earth, Wind, and Fire. She gets in the car. She goes, I just got this. It was probably a best of. And she sat down and she got the disc out.
Didn't know where to stick it.
Well, and you know how you used to hold the disc? You'd have your middle finger in the slot, the hole in the middle.
Hole, yep.
And you'd have your thumb on the outside, and that's how you would stop from scratching the actual media. And she had it, and she's like, where the heck is the CD player? And Stacy was like, this car doesn't have one. She goes, I'm sure expletive deleted, but are you serious? Yes, and it was that shocking. And then when I bought my new car, it didn't stop me from buying it because it had so many other. I mean, I had gone 9 years between new cars, so I went from having a cord to attach to my phone if I wanted to hear anything from it, to all wireless, cordless, Bluetooth. I mean, everything. I took a major step forward in technology, but I did not have the CD player. And it was just a shock to the system to learn that something that was birthed while I was in my formative years we're basically reading the rest in peace on it now.
Yeah. And unlike records and cassettes, we didn't see the birth of those.
Right.
So it was like, who cares? Good riddance to them. we've got this better thing. But when you see something rise and fall, it's a little more a part of you, and there's a an emotional attachment to it. And I bet your mom, when she first found out that the car didn't have it, she probably thought, "Oh, you didn't pay for that option or something." It wouldn't have even, somebody who's not in the, uh, you know, out and about seeing how things have progressed uh, here in modern cars, they would have never imagined, well, what are you going to do if you don't have a CD player?
I'm going to listen to the radio.
Eh.
I'm going to go back to listening to the radio, and I did. And I listened to I listened to sports radio quite a bit, because although it's the same, it's different based on every game that happens. So, but there are times even I switch off to music, the different varieties of music. But my car does not have a satellite radio option. It's got the satellite radio antenna, but it does not have a satellite radio option, so I can't even go that route.
Wow.
So it's possible that satellite radio is even beginning its decline.
I don't doubt it. I mean, they've already had to grab onto each other. Sirius and XM. They started out competitors, and they couldn't even make a go of it. The two of them. I mean, I saw it as, we usually have a yin and yang in every consumer market, and it offers a tug of war. Like in smartphones, it's Samsung and Apple.
Mm-hmm.
But when the two of them had to grab each other to stay afloat,
yeah,
it was not a good sign for the medium. We've talked before about in TV how they've increased the commercial time since the 80s, 90s, whenever. Have you noticed if they do the same thing in radio?
I don't think they have. I think they have increased the cost, and they've increased the sponsored by, brought to you by, brought to you in part by. Different things are getting sponsored. Like a local station from where we grew up has something called the birthday wheel. And the birthday wheel, you spin it, you have the caller on the phone, and if it happens, you have a 1 in 366 chance, I guess. Depending, you might be a leap year baby. You have a 1 in 366 chance of it landing on your birthday, which doesn't sound like much, but it's certainly better than playing the lottery. Well, that's now sponsored by a local pizza joint. So the birthday wheel brought to you by Pizza Joint. So I don't think the commercial time has increased, but the buyable items, the sellable items, I guess depending on what angle you're taking this from, has increased dramatically. I have noticed it's still a trend that most of them go to commercial breaks at the same time. I would always want to be that one that didn't. I would want to be like if you have 8 local stations and 7 of them are breaking at the same time, I want to be the other one, because everybody's turning off that ad and they're coming over to my station.
Now, let's talk about how and why 7 of those 8 stations how could they possibly be on the same timing? And it's because those 7 or 8 stations are all owned by the same company.
Well,
right?
there might be a yin and a yang, but we're down to 2 owners.
I knew of Clear Channel and iHeartRadio. What is it now?
So there's Cumulus Radio.
Cumulus, okay.
There's Cumulus Radio. I think Clear Channel became iHeartRadio. Okay. Which they've both filed for bankruptcy.
Now that's that's the thing. Is they're just like satellite radio. Well, I don't know. Has satellite radio declared bankruptcy?
I don't think SiriusXM has done that yet.
But here these radio stations are all owned by the same 2 conglomerates. And am I wrong? Didn't they have a rule, or maybe it was an actual law,
Yeah.
that you couldn't own more than so many
And
affiliates.
it was a small number.
And it was a very small number.
Yep.
Yeah, less than 10.
When they
right?
deregulated, that actually had the opposite effect. It was well, in this case, two large corporations that came in and gobbled it up. It's happened a little bit in TV also. I beg your pardon, 3 of the 5 stations in Youngstown are all owned by the same group. So, and the other 2 are also owned by the competing group.
Yeah.
So
these radio stations are all owned basically by the same corporate conglomerate, and part of what we've seen is these smaller markets, they don't want to pay for a DJ personality, right? So aren't we had Doug FM back in the early 2000s, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yep.
They played a lot of great music, and there's nobody talking. It's just this guy, Doug FM. You'd hear him say something dumb.
We play anything,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
But there was no personality to it, and so it was just consuming the music.
Right.
But now there's no personality. You don't care what station you're listening to. You just want to hear music that you like. And we've lost... It's just another example of us losing touch with our local community. Because when it was local, I think of Hot FM 101 out of Youngstown.
Right.
You knew the people's names. They'd set up spots in a parking lot someplace.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were like, oh, there he is.
That's the rascal of the radio.
Yeah,
or,
he's the DJ. I know. I hear his voice all the time.
That's
Here he
AC and
is.
Kelly.
Yes.
Yeah, they've been together for 20, 30 years on
Yep.
Hot 101. But you're right. So what they've done now is, rather than paying a DJ staff, is they've gone syndicated.
Mm-hmm.
So Hot 101, continuing our example here, at 7 o'clock they go to a national station. They go to a national broadcast. Adam Bomb. I mean, it's terrible.
Oh my goodness.
But he's terrible name. But he's on several. He's on in many markets. One of the other Youngstown stations has Delilah on it at night. Now, Delilah is different because it's more human interest. I mean, it's about music, but it's more human interest as well. But there are Bob and Tom in the morning. That's nationally syndicated. Stern was nationally syndicated till he went to satellite. He couldn't handle the being edited. He couldn't handle being told what to say and when to say it.
Yeah.
But so there are a lot of syndicated programs that are now taking the place of DJs, and in fact, the oldies station in Youngstown, 103.9, is totally satellite. They don't have a local DJ at all. And it's sure, oldies music now plays stuff in the 80s. Imagine that. Oldies music plays stuff from the 80s. But without that local connection, that is hurting. Why would I listen to it? It's not just about music. I can consume music many different ways.
Yeah.
Not on physical media anymore, but I can consume music many different ways. I like the local personalities. There was a DJ on Drive Time on Hot 101. His name was Bob Popa. He was the uncle of my next door neighbor. So I got to know him in more than one way. He was the DJ that I listened to, but he was also a human being. And I just felt a certain, I'm going to listen to him. I'm going to listen to him because he's a real guy. I've met him. He's nice enough. He represents the station well. So that has hurt radio a lot. So when you don't have physical media and you don't have access to satellite and all the stations are playing commercials at the same time, it's no wonder you turn the power off and you make a phone call.
Yeah.
It's no wonder.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true that you can get songs from anywhere. So what's the draw of a national radio station that just plays the same couple of songs every hour, and nothing between those songs except ads. There was something of a community in having somebody to come on and tell you, be careful out there. There's a big pothole there,
Right.
Second Street and Livernois, whatever. It's just, what you'd think that would be something to distinguish one station from another. But again, if you're just looking at the ledger, you're looking at, I'm paying somebody to spin records. They're only in there for 4 hours, and I'm paying an annual salary of this amount. I can't justify it.
And the term spin records, that itself is old school and very physical media style. I don't think younger people understand the origin of some of these cliches that we hear, but they mean something. To spin a record was just that. You put the record down, you close the middle notch, you put the needle down, and you started hearing the needle literally scraping against a piece of plastic.
Yep.
But I think the audio industry has made a mess of itself for a lot of reasons, but they're not alone.
Yeah. Well, and the other half of this is, we're paying money to listen to music or to watch a movie. And it used to be when you paid that money, you had something in your hands.
Right.
You had a compact disc. You had a DVD that you could take with you. You could sell to somebody. Now, you're paying $4 to watch a movie one time on a streaming device.
Yep.
And it's absolutely gone. Or let's say you pay, the $12 or whatever it is to own a movie.
To own a computer file.
Yeah. Now, what does it mean to own it? You can't put that file on a thumb drive like what we were talking about before.
Right.
You can't hold on to that forever. You have to use a specific service to retrieve that, to watch that, and not only does your service have to be up to date, you have to have a device that plays that service.
An app, a television app, a Fire Stick app, a Roku app,
Yep.
a smart TV. You're right. Without that, you're watching it on a 5.5-inch screen.
Yep.
On your phone.
So a few years ago, I bought a Sony media streamer. It's a little box. I think it was the SMP 200. And I got it because it was one of the few boxes that, in addition to an HDMI out, it had analog out. Analog video. Not just composite, which is the yellow connector. It was the blue, green, red, I think it was.
The PG
component.
Yeah.
Yep. It's the component video, which actually allowed high definition through analog. And the reason I did that is I didn't want to be tied to a high definition display that had HDCP copy protection. I wanted to be able to watch this content on my terms. Well, because it had a USB input. So you could put files
install into it,
and
yes.
it was beautiful. You put a video file on it, and you could watch it. I've got it set up in our van, our old minivan, that you can hook it up and watch it. Well, I tried using that device to watch YouTube a while ago. Now, YouTube is it's absolutely free. So And this device comes with YouTube. So I plug it in. I hadn't used it in a good year and a half.
So YouTube was pre-installed on this
Yes,
media reader.
as an app. Yep.
Okay.
And
The
so I
plot
thought,
thickens.
yep. So I'm going to have to update YouTube, I bet, because I have to update YouTube all the time on my PS3s. And so I plug it in, click on YouTube, and it takes me to an error page that says you are unable to view this content. And I'm like, it's YouTube, it's free. Who do I talk to get this updated? You can't. You are beholden to an agreement between Sony and Google, who owns YouTube, for Google to bother to take the time to rewrite code for this specific Sony device to be able to play. And on the one hand, I understand, because YouTube is constantly improving their codecs to allow more efficient high definition. Now they've got to deal with 4K. Now they've got to deal with HDR, high dynamic range. These are formats that my device was never intended to display. But YouTube should be able to handle that. YouTube should be able to see what your device is capable of and send it. I mean, even a 4K content on YouTube, you can force it to display at 144 kbps, a very low, not even standard def, below standard def. You can force that. So why can't it just send a lower resolution stream to things that can't handle it? It's just an example of forced obsolescence. That if they don't take the time to update, my device becomes a brick. Yep. Through no fault of my own. I've paid money for this thing, but this thing becomes a brick with the passage of time.
What I think is interesting is I recently bought, we have 2 Rokus since we cut the cords. We have 2 Rokus, and Walmart was clearancing out the Rokus. This was about 2 Christmases ago. And when they were clearancing out the Rokus, I got online to find out why. It's because the Rokus were being remodeled. They had Roku 1, Roku 2, Roku 3, Roku 4. And each one was a step up. You know, you could do this, you could do that. One of them was high def and, you know, etc. Well, so they were remodeling their lineup to create 2 streaming sticks and 1 unit. Now, I like the idea of the unit because you can put a media memory extender in there. You can have a wired connection. If, like, for example, my Roku 3 is sitting near my router, so I actually have it plugged in by wire. I'm not gonna. Why would I have it steal Wi-Fi signal if I don't have to? I mean, so I just ran a wire behind it and right into the router. But we purchased, when I wanted to get a new Roku, I waited for them to update, and they did. I got the Roku Streaming Stick Plus, which is HD, not HDR. What's
4K?
It was 4K, but it's the other one you said also.
HDR. It's high dynamic range.
Yeah, exactly. Don't listen to what I mean. Listen to what I say. So yes, it's HDR and it's 4K. They call it technology proof. You should not have to create something that's called technology proof. You should just make sure that technology has the ability to evolve. I mean, because Skynet, it's going to evolve on its own anyways. You should allow that to evolve and update at its own pace. You should not have to create something that's called technology proof or create something like on your end where your Sony streaming service became a piece of furniture, a non-functional piece of furniture. So, yes, I would think that these giant multi-billion-dollar companies would have the capability to make sure that my hardware and my software can talk.
Yeah.
So,
But that's the Silicon Valley mindset, though, is we're not looking backwards. We're constantly looking to the future. And it just seems funny that, when these old devices are no longer useful, they become landfill. And so these companies they want to portray this green image. One of the most amazing things to me is Apple, which they've got such a stranglehold on this, this progressive corporate image, yet you can't even replace the battery in an iPhone. It is so disposable. It's so expensive yet so disposable.
you can't replace it on the Galaxies anymore either.
Yeah, which that used to be the big selling point. Is the Galaxy? You could open it up, replace the battery. You could insert SD cards. They had a micro SD card slot.
Oh,
Did they bring that back?
It still
Okay.
has a slot. I have the S7.
Okay.
It still has a slot, but you need a magic key to get into it.
Does it come with one?
It actually comes with the key
Okay.
now. They got in a little bit of trouble for that. See that? Well, this is great radio right here, but there's a hole right there. If this put a tiny little, essentially a tiny like a toothpick or like an ice pick, you put it in there and it turns, and the slot opens up for an SD card.
Okay.
So,
Well, I'm encouraged that they haven't abandoned that, because that was the big draw for
anti-Apple.
yes.
Yes.
Oh,
It wasn't
absolutely.
necessarily the
Yep.
draw to Google; it was the draw to anti-Apple.
Anti-Apple. Yep. Now, coming from a home theater perspective, I'm big into home theater, and a very popular DVD and then Blu-ray player in the home theater realm was Oppo, OPPO. And this is when a Denon DVD player, I think was $2,000, $2,500,
Wow.
was the best performing DVD player in the early 2000s.
Wow.
Oppo came along.
Quite a cost.
Yep. And they were able to produce one that was just as good for a mere $500 for a DVD player. Now keep in mind, this is when you could get a 5 or 6 disc DVD carousel for $70.
Right.
So 500 was outrageous. So 2000 was absolutely just mind-numbing. But anyways, Oppo had this very strong following in the home theater realm, and then they came out with a Blu-ray player, and the Blu-ray player was very strong, and it had streaming services on it, and they received accolades for always keeping everything updated whenever YouTube came out with different features. It would get updated on there, pushed out, and the customer service was just first rate. Well, they came out with the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray device, and it had no smart capabilities, no streaming services or anything. And their argument was, well, you can get a stick that has the latest on there, so why bother having us as another redundant thing?
How about one-stop shop?
But that's exactly. It used to be the Swiss Army knife of this stuff. Well, here we are 2 years into their Ultra HD player thing. they're completely out of the market. They have ceased selling any uh, players.
They killed
They got rid of
themselves.
everything.
They committed suicide, essentially.
It, it would appear, that they didn't want the hassle of dealing, and it probably was a hassle, having to keep YouTube feeding them, Netflix feeding them updates to make sure that they were always up to date with content that was playing. But now it's just happenstance that I came upon this.
Mm-hmm.
I recently saw a unboxing of an Oppo phone. It's a smartphone. So now they've gotten out of this physical media thing and they're into the premium smartphone market. So
I was not aware of that.
And I've heard nothing since. And I'm waiting. I troll the home theater websites. I keep expecting somebody to say something about how Oppo has completely changed its mission into yet another Android phone thing. But it's sad. But if it doesn't make money, it doesn't make sense, right? So this is why the industry is doing what it's doing. This is why radio is doing what it's doing. It's because they're following the money. But I don't see a good outcome for when everything is digital and the means of consumption have an expiration date that they don't tell you. At least when you buy milk, you see the expiration date. You know how long it's going to last.
Can you imagine when I was shopping for that Roku?
Yeah.
If it said, this will be obsolete in 5 years. 5 years would be a great amount of time for something like that.
Yeah.
But they've called this technology proof. They claim this will continue to update. But at some point in time, you know darn well that Roku's going to stop servicing that.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I've got a handful of GPSs that have stopped working. Well, it says here I've got lifetime maps, lifetime...
Do we not have a satellite up there any longer? You
Yeah,
know?
well, and when you get into the details, they say the reasonable lifetime of the device. And a lot of them, it's 5 years. Well, you see lifetime is real big,
The big
on the
letters.
cover of the box.
Right.
But you don't see what lifetime means anywhere on the outside of the package. You might not even find it in the pamphlet.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to go to the online EULA, the user agreement, that is implicit when you buy it, that you're accepting this. When you install the software for updating this device,
Mm-hmm.
it's part of that EULA. And yeah, a lifetime is 5 years, which is just crazy.
You mentioned the Blu-ray industry, and I find that. Do you remember how long has it been? I don't think it's been that long that Blu-ray was the winner, so to speak. Wasn't there HD, DVD,
Absolutely,
and
yes.
Blu-ray, and wasn't there even a third one when they were trying to determine what was going to be the high def video style? I believe Blu-ray won, but I remember HD, DVD, and I thought there was a third one, as high def began to take over. I don't think Blu-ray has been declared the winner for that long. I think it's only probably been 5-6 years.
Well, I think it came out in around 2007, and I'm stating that only because when the PS3 first came out, which was around 2008, it gave a huge jump advantage to Blu-ray because it had a major install base instantly, and it was the cheapest one. So what would you rather do? Buy an entire gaming system that you could get on the internet, played Blu-ray discs and was a video game system, or would you just get something that played Blu-rays
and
for
had
the same
access
price?
and had access to the internet, and eventually had access to the apps that we've been talking about.
Yep.
The Netflix, Hulu apps of the world.
Yeah, so there were a lot of different. I don't want to say a lot. Samsung, LG, and Sony pretty much carried the water for Blu-ray, but Toshiba was the only HD DVD player, the only manufacturer of HD DVD. Now, if I had to point to something besides the PS3, the PS3 is the reason that Blu-ray won. But the most interesting contrast was when Transformers came out. I think it's Michael Bay, right?
Yeah, Michael Bay.
And you had the Blu-ray version was in DTS HD Master Audio or Dolby True HD. The HD DVD, the disc wasn't able to physically, it couldn't handle that much data. It was too small a container because it didn't have the capacity of Blu-ray. Blu-ray was like 50 gigs. So the awnings. So the HD DVD version, the highest quality audio output on that disc was Dolby. It wasn't True HD. What was it? It was an intermediate between the high-end Dolby True HD and DVD quality, which is Dolby Digital. So, anyways, it couldn't handle it, and we were only like a year or two into the format, so that was a nail in the coffin. But the coffin was built by PS3.
So with the Blu-ray, what I find interesting is as the media evolved, as the way we received media evolved, and as our generation began to want to attach to its youth, one of the ways that the television and movie industry adapted to us was they gave us access to all sorts of full series TV runs. Like you would be able to get the entire Seinfeld in one box.
Yeah.
All of Cheers, all of go into the 70s, all of the Brady Bunch, Welcome Back Kotter, whatever. Yeah. You would be able to get the entire run of those. And those started to sell very, very well. At all of the CD shops, FYE, many of them don't exist anymore, but FYE, I can't even remember another. It's been so long, I can't even remember another one now. But a lot of their sales were on these TV shows. And they were very popular. And like I said, we were able to connect back to what we appreciated and enjoyed. Well, as these shows began to show up on streaming services, that put a serious dent in the physical media.
Yeah.
So, take Star Trek, for example. One of the biggest things that they wanted to do, they being CBS Home Video, was they wanted to make the original series and the Next Generation, which were the first two, on Blu-ray. They released them on DVD, but now they thought, hey, this is 200-300 years into the future. Why don't we make this look as good as we can? So with the original Star Trek, they actually edited some of the stock shots. The Enterprise never had any depth. It always was two-dimensional. So in all of their bumpers, they actually inserted new shots that gave it 3 dimensions. It didn't look like it was a piece of cardboard just sort of hovering because that's what it looked like in the 60s. And then they made it high def. Because if you made it high def and you could see the old stock shots, you'd see strings.
Oh my goodness.
You'd see strings. You'd see all the things that would no longer suspend your ability. Your
Suspension
reality
of disbelief.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You would not be able to suspend your disbelief. You would be forced to believe it, that you're seeing strings. So they made the changes. They produced the 3 years of the Star Trek and 3 discs. They made the changes. They produced the 7 years of the next generation on DVD. I mean, on Blu-ray, I should say. So when that came out, my wife was very, very proactive in helping me find them. Whenever one came out, she would buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time they were, $40, $50, but it had a ton of bonus content. Blooper, gag reel, director's cuts. Basically, a couple episodes, the director would be talking underneath the episode airing, so you'd be able to hear what and why. There were a lot of special things created that were added to it, so it was well worth the money, as well as the entire thing being in Blu-ray.
Mm-hmm.
Now available on my PS3, which I had. Streaming services come along. CBS All Access debuts. That actually has killed this business. Deep Space Nine, which was the next one, Voyager, Enterprise. Those are the next three after that.
Mm-hmm.
CBS has announced they're not making high def. They're not making Blu-ray versions of it.
Wow.
Because they're available on streaming services, and it's a waste of their money.
Yeah. And I have heard that if they could, companies would rather you never have access to their content physically. That digital distribution is actually perfect for them, because now there is no secondary market.
All they need
There's
is
no
a server.
selling it to somebody else. It's this is the stranglehold. They now control everything. And to go back to we talked about the format wars, Blu-ray versus HD DVD. Well, back in the early days of DVD, Circuit City, which died a miserable death.
Another gone one, yeah.
07, 08 time frame. They had something called DivX. Well, we know DivX now as a codec.
Yeah.
But back then, a DivX disc was one that you would activate as it was kind of a rental, that instead of returning it, you threw it away. And it would, I don't know if it was digitally or physically decay, but it only had a certain shelf life that you could use it, and then you pitch it. Now, that's not a very eco-friendly format, and it went nowhere. But it was an early attempt at, okay, we want to make sure that we don't have a secondary market emerge where people can sell things. We want to be the controllers of all sales.
Mm-hmm.
We own this commodity. We want to be the ones to sell this commodity.
We know, and I had somebody ask me once, what's the big deal? Well, it's a huge deal. Standard definition for a not even a cult following show, but a vastly popular show. Standard definition almost doesn't seem fair. It's for suckers. Mm-hmm. Retail and standard def are for suckers. So the CBS people said that the amount of time and cost it took to convert the film that they used actual film to record these episodes. So they had to convert that to DVD, but then they had to put all the special effects back into it, because in that conversion, you lost your special effects. So every phaser shot, because that thing's not actually producing a red light, every phaser shot, every bumper shot had to be reinstalled, replaced. They said that it's no longer worth it. So Deep Space Nine and Voyager will never be seen in high def. That's crazy. Not even on the streaming services.
Even on streaming.
Because they're not even going to pay to convert it to high def so they can stream it on their own service.
And the sad thing is, this is just potential revenue sitting there. That,
sure.
I mean, think about the what's a show from the 70s? The Brady Bunch. The Brady Bunch made their money when people watched it during the 70s.
Yes.
That's when it was made for. They made their profits from it. It's only because of the arrival of well, we've got syndication,
Right.
so
That's what did it first.
they got to
Syndication.
make money a second time. Then we came out with the VCR. They got to make money a third time.
This is physical media. Yep.
And then, the graduation of multiple physical media, and then on to streaming. These are things that have been paid for, multiple times over. That it's really a windfall for the production companies that own the rights to them.
Because can you think about this? So the Next Generation and the original series are both in high def. If you're CBS and you came out and you said, coming soon to CBS All Access, Blu-ray versions or high def versions of Deep Space Nine and Voyager, I guarantee you they would sell subscriptions. Guaranteed. Would it be enough to pay for the conversion? Maybe not. But what you would do is you would get those $6 a month subscriptions, and then they'd be seeing the advertisements. And it's just it's a financial windfall. It doesn't seem fair for them to say, we can't do this, it's too much of an investment, when you could then stream that high definition episode rather than that standard definition of an episode. And you know what? It makes a difference. It makes a difference. It does. Again, these shows are set into the future, so they will continue to look futuristic. Even by today's society, these shows will continue to look futuristic. It's not fair that they look hideous and grainy. It's just not fair.
Yeah. And the original Star Trek, because it was on film, that film is actually higher definition than high def. I think it might even be higher than 4K. Now, it depends on the quality of the film that was used.
It has to do with the number of images per second or something, right?
No,
that's on there?
it's the effective pixels per inch.
I knew there was a math computation. I couldn't remember if it was slots, if you will, versus pixels. Okay.
Now, but what you bring up is frame rate, frames per second, and film is 24 frames per second, whereas video is 30 or 60 frames per second, depending on if it's interlaced or not. So things look more smooth when they're on video, but they've got more depth and contrast and everything when they're on film. It's incredible. And the first time I really comprehended this is when I saw a movie from the 70s. Was it Silver Streak? Had Richard Pryor and the gentleman from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate
Gene
Factory.
Wilder.
Gene Wilder.
No, they did a lot of movies together.
Yep. Well, this thing is from the late 70s, and it came on HDNet, around 2005, 2008 time frame when people were transitioning over. And here I'm watching on what was at the time a big screen, 50-inch. I'm seeing perfect, beautiful, high definition of Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, and the individual strands of their hair, because
Gene Wilder had some crazy hair.
It was in the original footage. It was in the original film that we have never been able to see before, because even if you went to the movie theater to see it, you'd be seeing it on a big screen with a bunch of holes in it, perforated for sound to come through it, and a dim bulb. And every time you watch a movie at the theater, the film is decaying, because as the light passes through it, it's degrading the film. So we're seeing a pristine transfer. It's literally like you're going back to the 70s and seeing it as it happened. And it's I felt the same way about seeing the Star Trek. This was in the 60s, and you showed it to me. I'm seeing the texture, the weave of fabric on
Yes.
people's clothes
Yes.
from the 60s. And it's the next best thing to be in there. Now you can tell some of the props are cardboard
Right.
and stuff because of that.
They did a pretty good job of editing out those and replacing them digitally with other images for that. But especially the original series, they had to go through that a lot. The Next Generation was 87 to 94, so it was a little bit ahead. You know, it had 20 years on the original series. So, but yeah, the cardboard props were pretty much gone, and the Next Generation was able to use digital art for a lot of their editing. So,
Yeah.
but it is a financial windfall they are missing for sure.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Well, this has been a good discussion.
I think
Thank you.
I think we've gone as far as we can go on this one.
Yeah.